Hello everyone, vanakkam. Welcome. We are just trying to get things sorted here for our live stream. Let's see if we can get this happening. There we go. Hello. Beautiful. Yes, I do.
Can you hear me? Oh
No,
my God.
don't worry.
I apologize.
Technology. I always have this little jingle. Terminology. This is technology. Okay, let us start here. Have to start off with the jingle. Hello everyone, welcome to CQ Chats. I hope everyone is doing well, hope you're doing healthy. And as I mentioned in our previous episode, in CQ Chats, we journey around the world to meet new people, we confront our bias, we increase our CQ, which means cultural intelligence, so we can build lasting and meaningful, I should say, and meaningful relationships. So welcome to episode number 2. We are now heading to the province of Saskatchewan in Canada to meet Mr. TJ Warren. TJ, say hi to the folks. Yay! So nice to have you. Yay! So nice to have
Hello,
you
everybody.
on CQ Chats. How are you, sir? Amidst the pandemic that we are having here.
Doing really good, hanging in there. You know, it's funny that, you know, we're just in these unprecedented, times, and right now here for modernity, in the midst of this pandemic, we have all been, having to reanalyze the importance of
Yes.
everything that we're doing in our lives. And so I myself got, had opportunity just to reconnect with my family, my life, and who I am as, looking from inside out. And then being able to fall in love back with my home. So it's kind of a blessing in disguise, I guess.
Video you sent me of, the singing and the powwow that you do. So how is that? Is that affecting the Indigenous community a lot right now during this time? Because you want to come together in community, right?
Yeah, we're very communal people. So, a lot of our celebration takes places in various communities throughout North America. And so we're kind of very transnational people, meaning that, this invisible border that is there, what we refer to as the medicine line today, never really existed prior. And so we used to go, back and forth quite often. And so I myself, they would consider me as, I guess, an American citizen, but I myself, I would refer to myself as a Diné person.
Yeah.
And so traveling has been really interrupted.
And
so
I wanted to let's touch on that about your background. So you are Indigenous, like you said, you're an Indigenous, but not Canadian First Nations, because many people think that, in Canada and the United States, that, Native American or First Nations means it's like, like there's only one people group, but it's just so diverse, right? It's so far from the truth. Tell us more about your background, TJ.
Well, let me start by introducing myself. One of the most important parts of our kind of way of life is being able to utilize our language and reconnect that way. And so I'll do a brief introduction to my language. I come from the Diné people, so Yat ish kedo should TJ Warren Unishya. Ogre ne Toricini Shlom Patani Bushin at Lashi Tashe Kilchini Dashnell Kuta the Nanshle. So my introduction consists of 4 clanships that I identify. And so I get one from my mother. That's my very first one. That's who I am. And I'm from the Bitterwater clan. My second clan comes from my father, and I come from the Folded Arms people. And my third clan comes from my maternal grandparents, and my paternal grandparents is my 4th clan. And so all of these clans identify all of my relationships. And so for us as Diné people, kinship is very important. The understanding of family is important. Every day of our lives, we're constantly trying to strive for this balance. And in our language, we refer to it as hajon, hajonje. And so we're trying to reach for prosperity, kind of unity, and being able to have that balance in our life that comes with the beauty way of life that we understand. In First Nations people, in terms of the way that we identify, our language is that connection to the land. It's references to that. And so when we speak to that, you know, it grounds us, and it also kind of reminds us of the importance of who we are, who we represent, and being able to remember that when we step forward into public spaces. Here in Saskatchewan, there's 74 First Nations, but in Arizona, you know, we have a big diversity also. And so even though we number very, you know, very small population of the US and the Canadian society, you know, we were once,
Yes.
you know, the original habitants. You know, we refer to ourselves as the first people, but today you commonly hear of us as First Nations or Native American people. And so I myself wouldn't be considered a First Nations here in Canada,
Yeah.
but I am of Indigenous ancestry.
Yeah, so let's
and
talk about
original to the
that
land.
whole thing of identity, because I mean, you're an Indigenous person. We're here on, I mean, Turtle Island is what, you know, like North America. So when you're crossing over from like Arizona, for example, or the United States into Canada, like how does that work for you as an Indigenous person? I mean, this is your land, so I mean, you're just crossing. Like you said, is there that imaginary border, and how does that make you feel? I mean, about, you know, the U.S. and Canada, but do you know what I'm getting at? Like that distinction between the two, but you, like, you know, being an Indigenous person, how do you relate to that?
Yeah, like sometimes it infuriates me. You know, I get to the border, and because of these people who manage the border crossings, you know, sometimes they get very territorial. There's some animosity there, and you know, I have to pick my battles. Sometimes I want to educate people and, you know, tell them all about these borders and how they're colonial. But some days, you know, I need to make the grand entry at the powwow, and so I gotta get across right away. And so I need to be there quick. And so sometimes, you know, I
Yes.
say I choose my battles in that same
Yep.
understanding. But that's the thing. We need to educate. We need to uneducate people too, because a lot of this stuff isn't understood. You know, the Eurocentric education-based system that is implemented here in Canada and also in the US. And so
100%.
we have to remember
And
all
that
those
is why
things. And
I'm
so
so
those
excited to
hand in
have you on
hand.
this program, because I mean, for me, I took my, you know, 11th standard here, 10th, 11th, which is a grade, they say. And in that, I was never taught anything. I lived 10 minutes away from this heritage site, Indigenous heritage site, Wanaskewan, but no one ever in our classes taught us about Indigenous history. So that is why I think, collectively as a society, we really do, like you said, need, I mean, education, like Murray Sinclair said, education is what is going to get us out of this mess. And so I am so glad we're here to talk about this day. Before we move on, I just wanted to say, what language would you say that you were speaking? Like you said that Dine, is
Dene.
that it? And
So
that's the
Dene.
language. So can you just teach us
Yeah.
maybe like how do you say greetings in your language? Like if I was to, you know, like wanting to learn how to say greetings, how would one like greet you?
Okay, when you come across another Dene person or anybody else, you know, we commonly
Yat
say
e.
Yat e. Yat e means it is all good. And when somebody responds to you and says Yat e, they would also, you know, from their own perspective, say, "Oh yeah, it's all good." And so that's kind of the reference. We don't have words for
Right.
hello.
Okay. So
We don't have
yat
words
e.
for goodbye.
It's brilliant. We're increasing our CQ knowledge today. So we are all going to increase our CQ knowledge today. We have so much to unpack in a very short time. So just really quickly, I want to make sure that people know what CQ is. CQ is your ability to work effectively with a person from different culture. And like I said, it's our goal to build bridges using cultural intelligence. That's what we want to do. And I really believe that this can only be done when we start engaging with our perceived other people who we think are different than ourselves. So in every aspect of CQ chats, we will touch upon one topic, like I said before. And today's topic I thought was really relevant because it's Orange Shirt Day week here in Canada. We would talk about racism and reconciliation. There you go. There's the orange shirt. Perfect. We're going to talk about racism and reconciliation in Canada. And we really need to talk about this because we need to address the legacy, and what we're doing with Orange Shirt Day is addressing the legacy of the terrible legacy of the residential school system here in Canada. So, TJ, many people have this utopian view of Canada. You know, we're multicultural. We welcome refugees from all around the world, but we don't it seems like we don't want to welcome and engage with our First Nations brothers and sisters here in Canada. Um, I have many Indigenous friends who continue to face racism here. We've heard of stories. You've heard of the story from Quebec about the lady dying who was hurled racist slurs on her deathbed in a hospital institution, in a hospital. And here in Saskatoon, even where you are, there was an incident of a person basically discrediting Orange Shirt Day. So this is our main topic that we're talking about, racism and reconciliation. Can you shine some light on this, and why do you think that Canada and the States for that matter, why do you think Canada, America, but today let's specifically talk about Canada, why do you think Canada has this racism problem with its Indigenous population?
Well, it depends on how far you want to go back. Like we can go all the way back to the doctrine of discovery. You know, the thing that led all expeditions all across, you know, the Americas. And so, you know, Papal Bull was created, and with that, you know, when fur traders and the first explorers had come across here, you know, we had already interactions with other international people. So, you had the Vikings, you had the Spanish conquistadors, you had, you know, variation of explorers that had come to this territory. But the one that has been the most problematic is the European, you know, our relatives, you know, that had colonized the Americas. And so British, you know, they've colonized all across North America. And a lot of it was based on this myth of race, right? And so this idea that, you know, we could categorize people based on whether it's skin color or, you know, skull shapes. And so a lot of that originates from there. But we have to understand that race is a myth. We have to understand that racism does exist. We have to acknowledge it. And for us to go on into reconciliation, we have to identify it. And so I know you talked a lot about critical race theory and understanding those types of aspects. Those are important to do. We all need to have that analysis in our own minds and to check our own privilege. And so that the thing is that if we were to really identify what it was, you know, there was genocide committed on Indigenous people, the ethnocide, the ethnic cleansing, the brainwashing, the whitewashing of history has taken place. And we have to know that, we have to believe that, and we have to understand and educate people about that, because, you know, this is a process that needs to take place. And so for true reconciliation to take place, we have to see people admit, you know, their wrongs, and then the healing can progress from there. And the thing about reconciliation today, you know, what we've been seeing has been a forced, you know, under pressure kind of reconciliation in action, meaning like when the apologies were made by Stephen Harper, you know, to the Indigenous communities, he was forced, you know, Canadian government was being sued. And so if you issue an apology in that type of space, you know, is it really authentic? And so we have to think about many of the things that have taken place. You talked about, you know, the movements that are happening. You know, we talked about the young lady who was in the hospital and how she was racial slurs, and you know, this is a daily thing in our lives. And our own people weren't even educated about colonization. Our own people weren't taught about race and racism or the genocide that has been committed on our people. And so our people are confused too. And so we need to educate our own people, and we need to have our own people in those spaces, to hold those spaces, to tell our stories from our own experiences. And so I think a lot of those things that we need to do is being able to make space for Indigenous people to do the work. You know, we talk about race, when we talk about racism, you know, people always say, well, what about how you guys treat us? You know, we would call it reverse racism. Well, reverse racism doesn't exist. You know, that would mean that we'd have to see everything change. I'd have to go to Europe. I had to colonize your country. I had to, you know, make, you know, the analogy is always used that I'm gonna come into your home, kick you out, and then invite you back in, but I set all the rules, you know? And so colonization, you know, is kind of at the source of what we see here, and racism exists because of that. And so we can talk about the lady in the hospital. We can talk about Colton Bushi and the prairies here. We could talk about the Starlight Tours that happen here in Saskatoon and Saskatchewan. And so I grew up in that environment. I've seen this my entire life. I'm, you know, visibly Indigenous. I got the long braids, the dark skin, and I've
Yeah,
experienced it
dark
all my
is
entire
beautiful,
life. It's
TJ.
crazy.
It is. Dark is beautiful. You know what? I share the same thing because in India, and this is something that in India we are we are taught since we're little babies that it is beautiful to be fair. And that's why we have fairness creams called Fair is Lovely. Like it's marketed, Fair is Lovely. So what are you saying? Dark is ugly. So we'll do everything to become more fair, right? And I mean, and it's yeah. Go ahead, go ahead.
Well, India was colonized too, right, by British. Yeah, so that's
Absolutely.
the
And
thing
you
that you
know,
share
the
with
thing that
Canada.
really, as you're talking
So
here, I just look back and we're talking about education. And I look back even to the social studies that I was brought up with. I had no concept, I had no idea about even just like the government, the institution, when the Europeans came here and set up this country of Canada. The first prime minister, for example, I'm only learning now. Like, let's talk about a little bit, just really briefly, because we have to touch upon this. I mean, you hear because in Canada we're hearing about people getting arguing on both sides about statues being ripped down. John A. Macdonald, for example. I just want to put this out there and I want people to understand, like, this is a quote from the first prime minister of Canada, John A. Macdonald, who said, and I'm just summarizing, the child lives with his parents. He's talking about residential schools who are savages, calling like literally savages. The child is simply a savage who can read and write. And he said, I quote this, Indian children should be withdrawn as much as possible from parental influence. And the only way to do that would be to put them in industrial schools, residential schools, where they will acquire the habits and modes of white men. 1879, John A. Macdonald. That is like assimilation, wanting you to become
yes,
like the white person, killing off. That is a cultural genocide right there.
yeah. Well, Johnny MacDonald is the father of colonization, assimilation, and genocide on Indigenous people, and so a lot of people don't understand that why we're calling,
Yes.
for the takedown of statues like that. In the States, the Confederate statues, the exact same thing. The scorched earth theory, the burning of Indigenous territories, and the livestock reduction, and the removal and disposition of Indigenous people. All of that originates from the colonial legacy, and so that's kind of thing that we need to teach,
Hmm.
our relatives. When you were talking about, this idea of benevolence that Canada has, we have to deconstruct that too. And so people think that, we're a very national, melting pot of rainbows and, unicorns, and that we all get along. And
Yeah.
that's the thing, is that we don't, and Canada always tries to sweep it under the rug.
Yes.
The US always tries to sweep it under the rug. And so we need real education. We need real history to be told. And so that's what we're trying to do here.
Yes,
Try to
brother,
give
we are
you
in
some of
this
that
together. This
education.
is awesome. Okay, so now that we've talked about this, I mean, we're talking about, yes, there is a racism problem. We just don't want to leave it out there. I mean, I'll tell you, I grew up in a small community. Probably 100% of them were white Caucasian people. Like, these were really sweet, sweet people. Most of my friends are all Caucasian people, but we're all having to relearn and to educate ourselves now because we were never educated about issues like this. Now, what do you tell people? I mean, we don't want to just leave it there. We want to address, we want to say, how do I enter into your world? What would you tell a settler, a white person, or an immigrant who's come to the country like me, like so many other people who don't have an understanding? What do you tell them? And what would you do in order to build bridges? What do you suggest we do to have true reconciliation? Because we don't want to just talk about reconciliation. We want to practice reconciliation. We want to take these steps. So what would you tell to a person? Like, oh yeah, you're just calling me a racist person. Like, I mean, but no, let's go beyond that. Let's take steps in order to reconcile. What are some of the things that you would say that Canada can do in order to build those bridges between the settler and the Indigenous populations?
Well, just know that Canada has been built on the theft of Indigenous lands, that the forced removal of Indigenous people did happen, that we are still here. We are resilient people. We walk past you every day, whether it's in the mall, whether it's downtown, and to
Mm.
look at our people as human beings. That's the thing about the doctrine of discovery, is that, religion and church-based kind of expeditions didn't see us as human beings. They seen us as floral and fauna, just part of the environment, just like everything else. They didn't see us as human beings. They didn't see us as equals, or, that's the thing that we're trying to fight for, is equity. If we were to think about all of the things that Canada represents, a lot of it is untrue. This idea even of meritocracy, this idea that if you try hard enough, just like them, you could be successful or you could succeed. But we have so many social issues and barriers that, we don't have the same starting point that everybody else does. And so we have to understand those types of things, and to look at everybody who is suffering around you as a relative, as a family. And so that's important,
so beautiful. And
to know
just
and
going
understand.
back to the whole, John A. Macdonald, statue thing too. And it's important that we remember, and I can't remember who is telling me this. I think it's in Belgium or somewhere too as well, or somewhere else. I think in there and in another, where they're mentioning, hey, listen, what you can do is keep the statues up, but let's write the exact history of what took place. So if John A. Macdonald is standing there, why don't we put a plaque in front saying, this is the person who did exactly X, Y, Z, and all these things to the Indigenous, community, rather than propping these people up as heroes, where history doesn't show it that way at all. So, reconciliation, what would you say that reconciliation, like, is this process of, we want healing, and like public truth sharing, like to be able to state the truth and then to apologize. And I think that's maybe where a lot of people have a difficult time, is accepting that I've done wrong, and just in normal everyday life for that matter. Like, I mean, to really to look at yourself and say, like, you know what, I've wronged someone and I need to apologize. But we as humans, we just love holding on to our rights. We don't like doing that. We're very prideful people as a human. I'm saying everyone, right? So
that's the thing about reconciliation, is that there's a lot of fragility that takes place for a lot of people. Either it's a sense of shame, an anger, resentment, and just plain racism that develops from a lot of that. And so, but I'm not saying it's just white people. We also have immigrants who come across who don't learn the history of Indigenous people. And I've been at these events, the swearing in of citizens, refugees that come here. I've danced at these celebrations and I observed, and I've asked questions to some of them, and I was like, well, have you guys got any lessons about the Indigenous people here? They're like, oh, just a little bit, and so, it needs to be done on a broader scale, and First Nations people need to be at those tables. They need to be in those arenas, and not just as representatives, but the people who are leading the talks. And so we need people to hold those spaces of leadership and to be able to have those opportunities to try to make those changes. A lot of times we always talk about how there's institutional racism, in academia, because that's my background, and I see that quite often with a lot of the things that are happening throughout Canada and North America. You see all of this indigenization that's taking place, this reforming of education, but a lot of it is just that, just kind of a smoke screen. It's just kind of hearsay, and it's just, words that are buzzwords at the time. And so if you research the words, indigenization originated with Catholicism, and how they, indigenized religion in Africa, how they would utilize the language to change it to definitions that, Indigenous people would understand. And so this is where indigenization originated from, the implementation of, religion onto other people. And so we have to be very wary on, these things, because a lot of this is just a repeating of history. Reconciliation is also something that took place in another place, and they tried to use that same framework here, right? And so we have to be wary of a lot of those and learn from a lot of those.
Beautiful. My desire is that we will go back to I wrote a song about this, TJ, is to go back to one of the very, very first treaties that was made way back, I think, I don't remember the year. This was about the two-row, the two-row wampum. Actually, I got a necklace here that I'm wearing. It's the two-row wampum here. One of my friends here made it for me. But, the whole concept of moving side by side in our canoes, as opposed to having someone else jump in your canoe and steer that canoe for you, is what's happening, or what's happened too, is to be able to ride side by side, which means equality, and so that we're not jumping in each other's canoe and forcefully trying to, like, no, but there's this beautiful relationship, there's forgiveness, there's reconciliation, and there's equality. So I'm really hoping and I'm praying that, I mean, I think it seems like we're coming. We still have a long ways to go, but we're slowly coming. I see people. Yeah, go ahead, TJ, speak, please.
I think I was going to just talk about, in terms of the treaties, everybody's benefiting from the treaties. People, we hear this also, everybody, we are all treaty people, but, what we see happening today is, not the acknowledgement of the Indigenous people and how they, help inform today's society. But if you look at it and you really dig into the history, a lot of constitutions and the way government works, whether it's in the States or in Canada, is built on the Indigenous people's perspective and worldview. Even in terms of the way Canada is known, throughout the world, this free healthcare that everybody benefits from, that originates from Treaty 6 right here, from the medicine chest clause. And so a lot of people don't even know these things, and we have to be able to educate them and say, okay, well, our First Nations people have benefited or have contributed to society way more.
That's
than,
great. So speaking of contributions,
so,
wow, this is, I mean, I wish we could go more. I wish we could really talk lots more. Okay, so let's wrap this up right here, and let's move on to something that I think will really benefit people who are watching. Let's do our just at the very end, at every CQ Chats, we really quickly, we'll try to be as brief as possible. We do something called CQ suggestions. And it's just something that people can take away from the culture too as well. So that could be like a movie, a book, a food or drink, or something that can help us really start to engage with that culture. So any recommendations for us, TJ?
Well, particularly for me, like I said, I come from the nation, from the Navajo Nation, and we actually have the largest reservation in the U.S., and our reservation is 27,000 square miles. We number anywhere from 350,000 people registered in our community. Some of our people who are well known are Chief Manalito, and one of the biggest things that we're known for is the Navajo Code Talkers, who helped win the world wars. And so we have a film that was based on the Navajo Code Talker Ira Hayes, who isn't of Navajo descent, but of the Pima. And the story of his is very integral in understanding, our contributions to the world. So the movie is Wind Talkers, and it stars Adam Beach. Yeah, and he's a Cree from Manitoba, a Soto, I think. And so he's one of the main actors there. Music-wise, I think one of the things that I would suggest is probably, we hear it all the time right now. It's very big, Redbone, Come and Get Your Love, And then a lot of the work that Buffy Sainte-Marie is known for here in Canada. And so she had some very kind of very moving songs that led a lot of the movements for Indigenous people. So if you don't know the history of Indigenous people, before Black Lives Matter, we've always tried to amplify our voices. And so some of the movements that were prior to that were the Red Power movement, the American Indian movement, you look at the crisis at Oka, you look at Idle No More. And so you have all of these things that were prior to Black Lives Matter. And so, but Black Lives Matter kind of got the entire world moving. And so, of course, Black Lives Matter, but within even that same place, we want to say Indigenous 100%. Lives Matter too.
You cannot say Black Lives Matter here in Canada without saying Indigenous Lives Matter. I mean, it just, and so I'm really, whenever I see those two together, it really warms my heart that people are not just saying, oh yes, Black Lives Matter, without addressing this important issue that we have here in Canada. I would actually like to recommend a book to some people too. One of that has really helped me is this one right here, called 21 Things You May Not Know About the Indian Act. And it's by a gentleman called Bob Joseph out of Vancouver. We actually made a video. I met Bob in Vancouver about 2 years ago, and we made a video on Orange Shirt Day. And it's been so great. It's really, really easy read, but I think I highly recommend this for every Canadian settler person out there who needs to understand, what the Indian Act is about. And also, Warren, do you recommend this book? I enjoyed actually reading this. Thomas King. This is the Inconvenient Indian.
Inconvenient Indian.
I enjoyed reading that one
very popular.
too as well.
There's actually a movie that is being made right now, and it's I think it showed at the Toronto International Film Festival just recently.
Speaking of that, you mentioned there's another film actually that I think people watch that just became free. I've been tracking with this. Is I don't know how to pronounce it in Cree. Yes, We Will Stand Up about Kulti.
We Will Stand Up,
right?
Yes. That's important film. I think that's very important, especially for right here in the prairies and understanding race relations and what it is that is taking place right now. And so that's real time. That's what we see happening throughout North America, actually. And so it's a very important film. I think reading the poetry of John Trudell and listening to the words of also Russell Means is also important. And so these are, people would say radicals, of Indigenous, activism, but, a lot of their words are true still today. You hear it in the music of A Tribe Called Red, who are also people that are very phenomenal in being able to share Indigenous culture through music and bring in some spotlight to a lot of the things that we're doing. And so this also a big thing that's happening, hashtag land back too is taking place. And so there's a lot of things that we could cover here today, but with the little time that we got,
thank you so much, TJ. In conclusion, just tell me, to wrap up, what's one thing that you would, I guess, like the world to know about your culture? What's one thing that you'd like to share with the world? It could be a message, it could be something about reconciliation.
I think it's important to continuing to learn more about the original inhabitants of this territory. We shouldn't just have one day out of the year to celebrate or to acknowledge, the harm that has been done to our communities. And so we shouldn't just have one day to celebrate, Aboriginal people, Indigenous people. We shouldn't have just one day to acknowledge the residential school era at the Orange Shirt Day. And so we should be able to teach throughout our curriculum the original inhabitants here. If you go to any other part of the world, you're going to learn firsthand the original people and some of the history in those territories. Why can't we do that here? And so that's what I try to advocate for is, to be able to bring more education from the Indigenous perspective. And I've seen at the university, sometimes there are people that are just reluctant, and they're like, why do I have to take this class? But it's important. Indigenous studies should be that, and being able to understand that. And we shouldn't be succumbed and limited to that realm too. We should see Indigenous perspective and knowledge in science and math and every realm.
TJ, thank you so much for being on CQ Chats. I really, really appreciate that you could come on here and share with us. I mean, this has been so beautiful. I think there's so much to unpack here. That's why we are, allowing this video to, it's not just a live video, it's going to be there for you to watch on YouTube as well after, so you can go through it and really start to unpack some of these things that we've been talking about. At the end of the day, our goal is that we can walk side by side and that we can be reconciled to one another, and that we can just enter into each other's world and get to know one another and be equal, like you said. I mean, equality is such a huge thing. So thank you so much, TJ. Yeah, the culture, absolutely.
The culture. The cultural intelligence that you talk about is, just one facet of the bigger puzzle. And sometimes Indigenous people get lost in multiculturalism. That's another thing. With the multiculturalism, all we do is celebrate food, fashion, and song and dance. And that's the beauty of our culture. Of course, it needs to be a part of it, but we also need to talk about the history, the wrongs that have been done, and being able to educate people about that too.
Good job. How do you say thank you in your language? Ahiaha.
We say ahiaha.
Ahiaha.
Yeah.
TJ. I'm trying.
Okay, yeah. Well, here in this territory, Treaty 6,
Hi. Oh, hi. That's right.
Hi.
Perfect. Here we go. We'll end off with our little jingle here. if we can. Romba nandri. Hi. No. Hi. Aha. We're gonna stop right there. Thank you, Romba nandri.